Hi, it's Black History Month again, 2023. It's Black History Month around here, 365 days a year, really. We got a lot going on in the public art arena, so many new things on the horizon. Just amazing how things are going, particularly when you're talking about Black history. So many new calls coming out and just some really exciting things that are coming down the pipe for me, so just kind of wanted to share with you what's going on. In 2022, I completed the Enslaved Africans Rain Garden Initiative. It is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's free. Located at 20 Water Grant Street in Yonkers, New York. If you Google, you actually can find the GPS and it'll take you there. Call me if you're in the neighborhood. I live around the corner. I'll come visit. The sacred place of my ancestors, the Montgomery African Burial Ground, is a destination project I've been working on since 2020. We made great inroads last year because the National Endowment for the Arts partnered with the Enslaved Africans Rain Garden Incorporated and gave us a grant to start the big one. In Montgomery, New York, not far from Interstate 84, on the side of the road on Route 416, in the woods, there is the Montgomery African American Cemetery. It is an enslaved Africans burial ground that was landmarked in 1995. The Sacred Place of My Ancestors initiative is an artist-led project that is employing public art as a rehabilitation strategy to transform the burial ground into a meditative destination so that people can reflect upon the lives of 86 enslaved Africans who were brought over by the earliest settlers of that region in the early 1700s. We were very lucky. The United States Department of Agriculture conducted a ground-penetrating survey to digitally map the interior to enable a design that respects preservation. And so through them, we discovered that the remains of 86 people are as close as 18 inches below the surface. As a result, a design to transform the gravel truck stop turnaround located at 20 Channing Road in Montgomery, we want to turn it into a handicap-accessible parking lot with an elevated walkway that goes around the perimeter of the burial ground. This is conceived to create a real cemetery that honors enslaved Africans but keeps people from walking on the interred and eroding the surface. EGEG. EGEG is a Yoruba name which means long journey. This is an 8-foot enlargement now that was funded by the grant from the National Endowment for the Arts to the Enslaved Africans Rain Garden Incorporated, which is a nonprofit 501c3 arts organization. This is our second project, which we've been a fiscal administrator for, and the Community Foundation of Orange and Sullivan County. More funding is needed. We're still in the process of development. Of course, your contributions are welcomed. The Sacred Place of My Ancestors, Montgomery's African American Cemetery, is significant to Black history because it sheds light on slavery in New York, a part of the state's history which is not often illuminated. It is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and its historic and cultural significance extends beyond the town of Montgomery. The site can inform histories of early European settlers, as well as histories of enslaved Africans in America and in the Northeast specifically. This is an act of community building for cultural equity, preservation, and rehabilitation of the site, as well as the creation of a destination that brings dignity to the memory of enslaved Africans. Of course, you may follow me on Facebook on the fan page, The Sacred Place of My Ancestors. On the road to freedom, Harriet Tubman is going to Niagara Falls, New York, to the Underground Railroad Heritage Museum. It's being funded by New York State Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. Public artworks of Harriet Tubman traditionally portray her as an old woman, but she was really only 29 years old when she escaped from slavery and returned to Maryland as an Underground Railroad conductor. Thus, I chose a more authentic allegory to catch and hold the eye. Harriet Tubman on the road to freedom. As a young Harriet Tubman, she is sprinting north on a path through Niagara Falls. So Harriet will be leaving probably at the end of February, and then I'll be working on the bas-relief that goes in the bottom of EGEG. When Harriet leaves, then the Reverend Lawson will come in. And that's an interesting story too, because oftentimes when I ask people, do you know who the Reverend James Lawson is? A lot of people fake me out like, yeah. And then they think, I'm not sure. I think I know, but again, he was one of those people that work behind the scenes. I'm really excited about doing this artwork to bring his story to the forefront. The Reverend James Lawson is the name of this piece, and I envision a candid portrait of Reverend James Lawson in his youth, at the height of his influence as a theoretician and tactician of nonviolence with the Civil Rights Movement. In the early 1960s, Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr. recruited Reverend James Lawson to come to Nashville, Tennessee to train college students in the Ghanaian techniques of nonviolence. As a result, 8 idealistic young black people, they called them the children, came together as part of Reverend James Lawson's workshops on nonviolence and went on to lead the revolution. Their courage and vision changed American history. Thus, I envision a suited Reverend James Lawson being met in a candid, iconic moment. Hand in pocket, emphasizing his point to his audience by raising his index finger in the air. Rising off the surface of the front of his jacket are the founding members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, known as SNCC. The courageous and undaunted Diane Nash, John Lewis, Ella Baker, Gloria Johnson, Bernard Lafayette, Marion Barry, Curtis Murphy, James Bevel, and Rodney Powell, whom Lawson mentored. Reverend James Lawson once said, "The heart of racism is the idea that a man is not a man." When Reverend Lawson shouted, "I am a man," more than 50 years ago, thousands of Memphis garbage strikers echoed him, and then millions of Americans did too. Thus, this artwork is titled, "I Am a Man." On the back of the jacket are the key figures, and these are now legends, and the foot soldiers of the Civil Rights Movement. That would be the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., Coretta Scott King, Reverend Ralph Abernathy, Reverend Wyatt T. Walker, Reverend Jesse Jackson, A. Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin, Reverend Cordy Tyndall, C.T. Vivian, Cleveland Robinson, Reverend Clay Evans, Stanley Levinson, Julian Bond, Andrew Young, Stokely Carmichael, James Farmer, and the Reverend C.L. Franklin. In the background behind them are the strikers carrying signs that state, "I am a man." Above the artist's signature is the Sanpoka symbol, meaning we must look back in order to move forward. So this is the guy, the war general for the March on Washington, the Selma March, the Freedom Rise March, the sanitation, any of the major marches that happened in the 1960s, this was the war general. This was the guy who devised and gave the orders that this is how we're going to do it, this is how it's going to go. He's 92 years old now, and he is fresh, he is sharp, his memory is crystal. I'm amused when he says, "Oh, just call me Jim." I mean, he's a regular guy, but I want to call him the Reverend James Lawson. When you ask him anything, he can tell you about how that went down. And so he has a book coming out in the next couple of months where he's going to tell some things and straighten some things out, because he says a lot of what's been written on the subject of the Civil Rights Movement is inaccurate. So we'll be very curious to see what he has to say. So it'll be an interesting year working on his artwork as well as talking to him, and hopefully I'll be able to get you some little snippets of us chatting. So New York is on fire. I am also getting ready to start Mary Burnett Talbert, an abolitionist, a woman who fought for women's suffrage and just the general suffrage for African Americans in Buffalo. And so we're just literally executing with the contract, we're just getting started with that, so that's coming down the road. Yesterday, this spring I'll be installing a new public artwork in Irvington, New York, to celebrate enslaved Africans. Yesterday is a bronze bas-relief sculpture of a pensive African girl, as many of the enslaved were youth, and the artwork is being installed next to the Main Street School in Irvington. So this is an image of an enslaved girl, and on the bottom of her garment there are enslaved Africans at work. The bronze will be attached to a beveled black granite slab. There's also a descriptive plaque that goes with this. For more than 200 years, the growth and wealth of the village of Irvington was inextricably tied to the forced labor of enslaved African men, women, and children who lived and toiled there. And the personal identities of the rest of Irvington's enslaved Africans have been lost forever, appearing as mere numbers in census records, wills, estate inventories. Thus, we honor their legacy and affirm their humanity, which was stripped from them in their time. Braille reads, remember. So we're getting ready to pour the foundation, and we're very excited about the installation. Stay tuned on that. And then, for those of you who've been waiting for a really long time, I'm here to tell you that victory beyond Sims is imminent. I'm in the process of going through a lot of paperwork to execute the agreement, but we've come to terms, and so I'm very excited to say that the next leg of that adventure will be getting through the final design gauntlet. There'll be some changes to the initial design. Not sure what's going to get through and what's not, but I think you can basically count on a giant winged woman on 5th Avenue at 103. I'm so really excited about the coming of this public artwork. It is so important. For those of you who aren't familiar with this story, in 2019 I won a commission to replace the J. Marion Sims public artwork on 5th Avenue at 103 in New York City. That came about because for 10 years the community that would be Upper East Side, Harlem, East Harlem, these communities collectively petitioned the city of New York to take down that sculpture because this man became the father of gynecology on the backs of 12 enslaved African women whom he experimented on with no drugs, no anesthesia. And then when he perfected his technique, he went to Europe and practiced on white women using painkillers and anesthesia. So it took them 10 years to get the sculpture removed. I won the sculpture commission basically because the community decreed it. So stay tuned on the development of that enlargement. It's going to be a really great year. There's some other things I'd love to tell you about, but they are not gelled quite yet. So since Black History is 365, I can tell you about that anytime. So stay tuned. Enjoy February because spring is coming soon.